This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Sports Files is made possible in part by
Infinity of Memphis has moved to Germantown Road, just half-mile north of Wolf Chase Galleria, and is proud to support WKNO for its quality broadcasting and service to our community. Quality and service? No wonder Infinity of Memphis feels at home on WKNO. The Lighting Source, major line distributor of commercial and industrial lighting, including hard-to-find bulbs and fixtures, as well as a broad range of LED products. With 35 years' experience servicing lighting needs, The Lighting Source proudly sponsors Sports Files.
The WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
My guest today on Sports Files is legendary Memphis television and radio personality, Memphis Tigers basketball fan, and a close friend of the late, great Elvis Presley, George Klein. Depending on when you're watching this week's program, the Memphis Tigers basketball season may have come to an end. We are taping before the Tigers hit the court at the Amway Center in Orlando for the American Athletic Conference tournament. Now, one thing we do know is that the Tigers' only chance to make the NCAA tournament field is to win the conference tournament. One man with a rooting interest in the Tigers is longtime Memphis radio and television personality George Klein. GK is an alum of the school and one of the biggest basketball supporters you'll ever find. He has been close to many of the Tigers coaches, among them current head coach Josh Pastner, who he is a big supporter of. Today, the Jeeker in your speaker joins me for a special edition of Sports Files to reminisce about the Tigers and relive some of his many memories with the late, great king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. And it's next on Sports Files. GK, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Greg. Been watching you all the time, man.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me. It's an honor for me. You are, and you're wearing the Tigers sweat jacket here, the whole sweatsuit. Yeah. You are a huge Memphis Tigers basketball fan. When did that start for you?
Well, when I entered Memphis State in 1950, got out of high school in 53, entered Memphis State in 53, and basketball was just beginning to break pretty good. We had Forrest Arnold, which was Aubrey's older brother.
Right.
He was a little All-American. We had some guys they'd recruited out of Kentucky that were really good, and they started playing big-time games, and it was like a storm coming through. They all caught on. They had a guy named Win Wilfong, who was made an All-American later on, went second in the draft in the NBA, who was an unbelievable player. And so it created a lot of excitement at the University of Memphis. And then they started winning. And when they did, man, then when they really broke through was NIT was the big game. That was way before NCAA's.
Right.
NIT, and we were in the NIT. We played in the final game against Bradley, and they beat us on the last toward the end of the game. And that really broke it big for everybody. So recruiting was easy, and we started getting big-time players and big-time coaches. And actually, a trivia question, we had a coach who actually coached the American Olympic team, Dr. Eugene Lambert. Now, the catch to that is he was coaching Arkansas at the time, but he came over here to coach Memphis, and Dr. Bramlett, he was a big-time guy. And so people started respecting him, and players started coming in, and the program just started rolling, man.
When did you become as passionate and as close to some of the coaches? We know that you're there at as many games as you can get to. With Josh, you're there. With Cal, you were there. I go back to the latter years of Larry Finch, and I've always seen you at games. Have you always had these relationships? How far back do you go? And to
Gene
which
Bartow.
Starting with Gene Bartow.
Coach Bartow and I became good friends. And if you knew anything about basketball, you knew this guy had it, you know.
Right.
He was the real deal. And so I don't know, I just would see Bartow at the games, and he knew who I was. He watched my television show at the time, Talent Party, and I'd come to the practices, and he'd come over and talk to me. And he had a son who lived 2 doors down from me in an apartment building. So I got to know Bartow really well, started doing some favors for him, like when they went to the finals. He said, GK, you got a record called Going to Houston? I said, yeah, Coach. He said, give me a copy. I'm going to play it in the dressing room. And it was going to Houston. Was it Dean Martin? I don't know who it was. And the first round was in Houston. And so I did little things like that for him. And he asked me to do some Elvis stuff for him. I got some autographs or whatever. But it started with Bartow.
How about your relationship with Larry Finch?
Oh, the best. Because I had a TV show at that time called Talent Party, which was on the air for 10 years in Memphis. And we had one segment where you had the Teenagers of the Week. The local paper at that time would select a boy and a girl as Teenagers of the Week. And they'd send them down to my TV show. And Larry Finch was the male teenager of the week. And so from that moment on, I started hitting on him really hard. I said, now, Larry, you're going to Memphis, aren't you? Well, he kind of hedged a little bit. I don't know, GK. I said, come on, Larry. I mean, man, we're breaking big-time basketball. You're a hometown boy. I said, come on, man. And he said, well, I'll think about it. But from that moment on, he and I became really good friends.
And it wasn't easy back then at that time for an African-American to commit to play basketball, even in his hometown.
Exactly right. He actually headed down to Oklahoma, he told me. Oklahoma and one other school, I can't remember what it was. But he and Ronnie Robertson were highly recruited coming out of Melrose. And Ronnie and him wanted to go together. And I remember when Memphis State wanted Larry Finch, I think it was Iba, was he the coach then? Coach Mo Iba?
It may have been.
But okay, Larry was just coming out of Melrose.
Right. And
Bertie Sales was an assistant coach at Melrose.
Right.
So Bertie Sales, Iba came over and said, man, I got to have this guy, Finch. He's great. And Bertie Sales, well, if you want Finch, you got to take Ronnie Robinson. Oh, I don't want Ronnie Robinson. He's not Division I basketball.'t not ready yet. Give him a couple of more years or what have you. And so for Bertie Sales said, if you don't take Ronnie Robinson, you don't get Larry Finch. And so we got him. And so one condition was
Bartow?
What's the coach's name? I just mentioned it.
Oh, Iba.
Iba said he was a slow down coach. And so Bertie Sales said, are you going to run or are you going to slow down? No, we're going to run. So if you're going to slow down, we're not coming. And he said, I want you as an assistant coach. So that's how Memphis got Larry Finch. And because of that, they got Ronnie Robinson and they got Bertie Sales. And here comes all those great ball players out of Melrose.
Larry Keenan then came from out of the area. So you go through that era where the team went to a national championship game, ran into the big redhead, Bill Walton and UCLA. Right. We move into the 80s, obviously before Larry ends up taking over as head coach when he was an assistant on Dana's staff. And you get this incredible player from West Memphis by the name of Keith Lee. Right. What was that like?
Well, if anybody knew anything about basketball, all you had to do was watch Keith Lee play one game or one practice, and you knew that the kid was something else. He probably was the biggest early player we got, I would say. Mm-hmm. Larry became a second-team All-American, and Ronnie Robinson was a third-team All-American. But Larry Keenan was in there, too.
Right.
Now, Larry Keenan was probably as good as Keith Lee. I mean, Larry Keenan was something else, man. And Big K, they called him. And but I would have to say that when those group of people came in, the program took off like a jet, man, you know.
We had these great years with Dana, and then unfortunately we had the probation that came with it. But then the early 90s, when Larry ends up taking over, we have a guy named Penny Hardaway. Who is still very prevalent and prominent in the community, and whose name has surfaced, as you've probably heard, rumors, if the Tigers were to make a move with Josh Pastner, would they go to a guy like Penny Hardaway who would excite the fan base? What was it like around here when Penny Hardaway made the move from Treadwell to then Memphis State and became a phenomenon?
Well, first of all, he had to sit out a year. He was ineligible.
Right.
I forget what the deal was, but they let him go to college, but he couldn't play ball or something to that effect. And I never will forget, Greg, I'm sitting down there with the Mid-South Coliseum, and all the coaches in town were looking at Larry. I mean, we're looking at Penny. And so and I said, asked one of the coaches, we're making notes and stuff. I said, how good is that guy, Penny Hardaway? And Penny was sitting over to my left, and he said, GK, he's the best high school ball player I've ever seen. I said, what? Is that good? He said, the kid is something else. And, of course, he was tight with Larry. And when Penny came in, we started winning big time. I mean, big time. We had one big time with Larry and Ronnie and all those guys and Wilfong.
Right.
But you know, basketball was just becoming really, really big in America. You know, it was always football and baseball, but back when those Larry Finch, I mean, you know, Dr. J guys and came around and those wonderful players, basketball took off.
It took off, especially Bird and Magic, what they
Bird,
did
yeah.
for the game. There were sustained success periods, but they were pockets. It wasn't consistently sustained for Memphis. You had Bartow and the guys we talked about with Larry and the national championship game they played in St. Louis. We had Dana Kirk and the runs that they made with Keith Lee. Then we had Larry with the runs they made with Penny Hardaway. Then towards the end of the 90s, the end of the century, Larry Finch was unceremoniously let go. And then there was a problem. The transition didn't work out well with Tick Price and then Johnny Jones. And then along comes this Italian named John Calipari.
Yeah.
And it took a while, but the whole atmosphere, the whole basketball world changed for Memphians and the Mid-Southerners as Calipari took this program that had been on the national map at times, but put it on a consistent basis nationally. What did Calipari mean to you?
Calipari meant exactly what you just said, put Memphis on the big time. Because Cal, you know, he had been assistant, I think, at Kansas with Larry Brown. And then he was in the pros. Remember, he was with the Nets.
As a head coach, right?
And then he was with Larry Brown at the 76ers for a minute.
Right.
And then...
but before that, UMass as a head coach.
Yeah, at UMass, he was the head coach. And he took UMass to the Final Four.
Right.
And then that's how he got to the NBA. And then something happened at the NBA. One of the players didn't like him. I don't get into all that crap.
It might have been Kerry Kittles. There might have been an issue there.
Yeah, it may have been. But then Larry Brown was coaching the 76ers, and he liked Cal. So he brought him over there. And then when R.C. Johnson was looking for someone, R.C. was a real good friend of mine. And I'll never forget, I was sitting up in his suite there at the FedEx Forum, and I said, R.C., what about this guy Calipari, who's assistant with Larry Brown? He said, how'd you know that? I said, no what? He said, I'm already talking to him. I said, come here. So we went back to the suite, and he said, we're going to get this guy, Calipari. I said, are you really? He said, GK, he's got the charisma, he's got the background, he's a great recruiter. He said, we're going to go with this guy. And we got him. And as soon as Cal came in, he and I hit it off, man. I don't know why. I think he liked Elvis or something. And we hit it off. And Cal was the first guy, Greg, of all the coaches, that after the game, you know how it is, there's a procedure, you go through it. After the game, the coaches come in and they have a meeting in the little room, and then they talk to the players what they did right or wrong, and then Cal would go meet with the media, then he would do his TV show. And so Cal said, GK, I want you to meet with the coaches before we talk to the players. I said, come on, Cal, you're kidding. He said, no, man, you know the game. And so he would have me in there, and I'd be shaking like a leaf. And so Cal would go around the room, and he'd say, okay, Derek Kellogg, what did you see tonight? Tony Barbie, what'd you see? Rod Strickland, what'd you see? Was it Rod
Strickland, right?
Rod Strickland. And so and then he got to me, and I said, Cal, I agreed with you, man. I said, I got that guy from Jackson, where he was from, Bartow. What's the B? He was a big center, got 16 or 20 games in the Gardens once. He played with the Miami Heat for a while, but he was from down in Jackson, Mississippi, or Clarksdale, Mississippi, 7-footer.
You're talking about Earl Barron.
Yeah, Earl Barron.
Right.
And Cal said, Cal didn't like Earl Barron a lot because he wasn't a physical player.
Right.
And I said, Cal, I agree with you, man. He let us down. He didn't play physical. He said, you're right, GK. But I was smart enough. I never disagreed with Cal. Now, one time, but Cal would listen. If you had an idea, and you had a good idea, and he knew that you knew the game, he'd listen to you. And I was there a lot. And so we get beat by Syracuse. I don't know if you remember this or not.
I do.
And Syracuse had that little All-American guard playing at FedEx Forum. And we had Tyreek Evans was playing on the Tiger team. And so we lose, and we go downstairs. This is a cute story. Go downstairs, and Cal does this thing. He's mad. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make those guys run Monday. And he was, so I just let him cool off. So we go in a side room, and it's me and Josh and Orlando Antigua. Remember Orlando?
Sure.
He's at in Florida somewhere.
USF.
All right, just us three sitting there. And I'm just sitting there, and I said, guys, what would y'all think about moving Tariq Evans to the point? And Josh spoke up and said, yeah, GK, man, he's got the best hands on the team. And Orlando Antigua said, yeah, man, he's 6'7", 8. How you going to guard a 6-foot guard? And about that time, Cal walked in, and we shut up, you know. So Cal is cussing up a storm, man, cussing up a storm, and you got to let him cool off. Don't disagree with him. I knew that. So when things calmed down, real quietly, I said, Cal, I said, I got an idea. He said, what, GK? I said, move Tariq Evans to the point. And Josh said, yeah, GK's right. He's got the hands. And Orlando Antigua said, yeah, Coach, man, he's 6 foot. How you going to guard a 6'7" guard? And the next game, he moved Orlando, the guard I'm trying to.
Tyreke Evans.
He moved Tyreke Evans to the point we won 18 in a row. Remember, we lost to Missouri, I think.
So I got to give you credit.
I didn't want any credit. No, I didn't want to take Cal's credit.
I want to get into, by the way, this book's been out for a couple of years now, folks. If you want to pick this up, it's fantastic. It's Elvis, My Best Man, and GK and Elvis on the cover. But this is all about your relationship with Elvis. But he paid for your wedding, which, give me the Cliff Notes version, because this is an amazing story that I'm sure you've written about.
Yeah, well, Elvis called me one day, and he said, GK, he said, you know, you're the only guy in our group's not married. I said, I'm aware of that, Elvis. He said, why don't you get married? I said, Elvis, we've been thinking about it. He said, I'll make you a deal. I said, what's the deal, Elvis? He said, if you'll get married, I'll be your best man. And he's never been a best man for anybody. He said, I'll be your best man. I'll pay for the wedding, which is going to cost us about $75,000. We're going to get married in my suite in Las Vegas. I said, Elvis, you got a deal, man.
Wow.
And
how can you turn that down, right?
Couldn't turn it down. Well, we were thinking about getting married anyway. So I took the deal, and he came through on everything, man. He had about 25 people at the wedding. He had a private photographer. Everybody got a set of pictures with him and everything, and me and everything. Then he took us to see Streisand, and he took us to see Glenn Campbell, and the total fee was about $75,000.
Wow. Let me ask you about this. Every once in a while, I see documentaries, and Elvis is tossing around the football, and then you see him at martial arts. What sports did he like? And I know he wasn't always here in Memphis. He was traveling around the world, but did he ever go over to a Memphis game?
He never went to a Tiger football game, but I did get him to go to the Grizzly, you know, when we were in the
WFL,
yeah,
the World
and
Football
then in Los Angeles, his next door neighbor owned the Los Angeles Rams at that time. Forget his name. And he told Elvis, they were neighbors.
Was it Carl Rosenblum?
No, I think it was before him.
Okay.
So he got Elvis to go to a game in Los Angeles. And Elvis said, okay, I'll go. So they stood in the tunnel, sort of, and people saw him, and they started mobbing him, and he had to leave the game. So he didn't get, he knew that he would disturb the whole situation if he went.
It was very hard for him to go out in public, but there was a situation in which you got him to go to 1 or 2 games at the Liberty Bowl to see this World Football League team.
Yeah, well, he liked Zonka, Kick, and Warfield. He knew who they were. He didn't know who Bassett was. The owner was until we made the introduction.
Right.
But also there was some other, I think a guy who won a Heisman was on that team, was a backup quarterback. And there's some really fine ball players. And there were some great ball players in that league. And Elvis was up on pro sports. Like I said, his favorite sports were pro football, pro karate, and pro boxing. He was very good friends with Muhammad Ali. And he and Ali became very good friends. He had a robe made for Ali. When Ali fought at the Kenny Norton fight, what it was, Elvis was playing Vegas. Ali's working out in Vegas, getting ready for the fight. Came over and met Elvis, and so Elvis and Ali just kind of hit it off. And so Muhammad Ali said, Elvis, I liked your outfits on stage. So Elvis said, hey, Joe, make a robe for Ali. And put the People's Champ or the People's Choice on the back. As Ali wore it into the ring, remember Howard Cosell said, Muhammad, where did you get that beautiful robe? And he said, Elvis Presley gave it to me.
How about that? Yep. You've told me this story before. I want you to tell everybody about it. Again, if you can, in the short version, about what you tried to do with Elvis to help the scholarship fund with the University of Memphis, then Memphis State, before he passed away.
Well, you mean, how do I solicit?
You were trying to, he had okayed, what, $25,000?
Oh, yeah, he okayed, and then he passed away,
and
it was all over with because his daddy didn't know about it, his manager didn't know about it, and I hated to go and try to get money from him if he just passed away.
What did you said to him? What was the approach?
I said, Elvis, I said, you know, I know that you like sports and you like football best of all. He said, yeah, I sure do. Because see, a couple of kids from Humes, where we went to high school, played for the Memphis Tigers. John Bramlett came from Humes.
Sure.
Red West came from Humes. So a lot of Memphis kids. Armstrong came from Memphis, played quarterback for Memphis State, longest throwing pass, whatever. So there's some Memphis kids on the Memphis State football team. And he said, well, what's it going to cost me? And I said, Elvis, about $25,000. He said, okay, get it done, and I'll sign the check. And then a couple of weeks later, he passed away.
Wow.
And I felt funny trying to procure the money
Right.
from his family after he passed away. And so it was just a hard to get. When Elvis passed away, Greg, it really was a tough time for his close friends, including me. I wasn't his only close friends. He had like Joe Esposito and Jerry Schilling,
Right.
and Red West, and some pretty tough guys traveling with him.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine.
It was probably the toughest time in my entire life.
And of course, you get to stay close to your dear friend Elvis Presley every Friday because you're on Sirius XM Radio, as most people know, from 2 to 6, right there at Graceland, live. I'm sure you're enjoying yourself. You've been doing this now for 11 years?
11 years. When they started Sirius XM Satellite Radio, I get a call from them, and they said, Mr. Klein, we're coming with this channel. I said, yeah, I've been reading about it in the trade papers. They said, we want you to do a show. And I said, okay. And they said, at that time, they were out of Washington, D.C. And they said, but you'll have to move to Washington. I said, I'm not moving to Washington. And they said, well, do you have a big garage? I said, yeah. So we'll build you a studio in your garage, and you can do it from your home in Memphis. He said, we do that occasionally. And so I said, okay. But then before we could get it solidified, Sirius and XM merged.
Right.
So now they call me, they say, you don't have to go to Washington, or we won't build a studio. All you got to do is drive to Graceland. You have your own studio. So I've been out there now, I've been 11 years now.
It's amazing.
And I get to kind of ease sports in, because I start talking about Calipari, and all the Kentucky fans listen to me, and then I'll talk about Larry Finch, and they remember him, and then I get Josh to come out at the beginning of the season, and Josh does an interview with me, but those Kentucky people, Greg,
They're rabid.
man, and so Cal told me he wanted me to come to a Kentucky game. So what happened was, he was doing his radio show, and a guy calls in and he says, Coach Cal, you've got that girl on your TV show, that female actress, what's her name? I forget. Her two sisters are singing.
Ashton Judd.
Yeah, the Judds. He said, you've had them at your game? He said, yeah. And he said, you've had Karan James, what's his name? The great ball player from...
Oh, LeBron James.
He said, you've had LeBron James there? He said, why don't you have George Klein? On a call-in show. I didn't know about it. And so Cal said, yeah, I'll get GK up here. And he called me. He said, when are you coming up, GK? I said, Cal, you get me a seat, in the middle of the court? He said, I'll try. I'll get you.
Did you go up?
No, I never made it up there. But I did go when he came through to play Ole Miss. He called me. He said, I got 2 tickets for you to the Ole Miss Kentucky game. And 2 years ago, I went down there.
You went down to Oxford. GK, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could talk to you for another hour, but we like to end all our interviews with something called 5 for the Road. I need a quick answer, first thing that comes to mind, real quick. These are easy questions. Favorite pro sports team, all time?
You mean any sport?
Any sport.
Well, I'd have to say New York Yankees.
New York Yankees. Favorite pro athlete of all time?
Dr. J.
Dr. J. This is going to be easy. Favorite musician, music? Should I say who's second behind Elvis for you?
Who's second behind? That's a tough question.
A guy whose whole life has been around music.
Yeah, the second was so far behind him, it was tough. But I'd say, Bobby Darin was in there, Ricky Nelson.
Okay.
James Brown and Jackie Wilson. Elvis loved, Jackie Wilson was his favorite singer.
Wow, how about that? Jackie Wilson.
I'd say Jackie Wilson would be a tie between Jackie Wilson and James Brown.
Favorite movie of all time?
Favorite movie of all time?
Any of Elvis movies?
Well, yeah, Jailhouse Rock, because I was in Jailhouse Rock.
Oh, you were in Jailhouse Rock. So there you go.
I'd have to say that, yeah.
That makes it easy. And finally, your favorite TV show?
My favorite.
What do you like to watch?
I watch ESPN Sports a lot. I like those two guys that argue. Take two or take one.
Oh, you like Kornheiser and Wilbon, PTI?
Yeah, I like them. Yeah. Kornheiser, except Kornheiser, he's a music guy. He starts talking about oldie records some occasion.
He's old school.
Yeah.
GK, you're the best.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. That's the great George Klein, and we're back right after this. Always great to catch up with GK. Now, while we're on the subject of the Tigers, congratulations to Dedrick Lawson for being named the AAC Rookie of the Year and also being named second team All-Conference, and to senior Shaq Goodwin for garnering first team honors. It's been a tough week for us here at WKNO as we not only lost a colleague, but a dear friend. Marketing manager Jim Eichner passed away after a brief illness. He was 82. Jim worked the past 28 years here at WKNO, and you either know him, know of him, have seen him, or have heard his great voice. In fact, as soon as I'm through, you will hear Jim on our underwriting credits. And to Jim's family and friends, our thoughts, prayers, and heartfelt condolences. Good night, and we'll see you next time.
Production funding for Sports Files is made possible in part by
Infinity of Memphis has moved to Germantown Road, just half-mile north of Wolf Chase Galleria, and is proud to support WKNO for its quality broadcasting and service to our community. Quality and service? No wonder Infinity of Memphis feels at home on WKNO. The Lighting Source, major line distributor of commercial and industrial lighting, including hard-to-find bulbs and fixtures, as well as a broad range of LED products. With 35 years' experience servicing lighting needs, The Lighting Source proudly sponsors Sports Files.